Nicki Minaj has built a life that looks, from the outside, like a fantasy. A multi-millionaire artist with record-shattering success, an army of devoted fans, and a family she's fiercely protective of. But behind the platinum albums and designer gowns, there's a question that's never quite gone away. Is her love life really about love, or something far darker she can't let go of? Because if you look closely, there's a hidden pattern buried in her choices. A pattern shaped by a childhood so chaotic it left scars she's still trying to outrun. And as much as she tries to convince the world that she's finally found happiness, the truth is more unsettling. Fame can change almost everything about a person, but it can't rewrite the lessons they learned in a house full of turmoil. Before Nicki ever knew what love was supposed to feel like, she was taught that pain and devotion were often the same thing. And no matter how many chart-topping singles or millions of followers she collects, her heart keeps drifting back to that same dangerous memory. Long before the world knew her as Nicki Minaj, Annika Tanya Mirage was a little girl growing up in a small house in Trinidad before her family moved to Queens, New York. Her early years were anything but ordinary. From the time she was old enough to understand the tension in her home, she learned that love could be tangled up with fear. In interviews, Nicki has talked about the nights she lay awake, listening to her parents scream at each other behind thin walls. She described the way her father, Robert Mirage, would punch holes in the drywall out of rage, and how the air in their house always felt thick with danger. One night, when Nicki was still a child, her father set their home on fire with her mother trapped inside. That single act crystallized a lesson she'd carry for the rest of her life. The people who are supposed to protect you can also be the ones you fear the most. Nicki would kneel at the foot of her bed, praying to a God she hoped was listening, begging to get rich one day so she could save her mother. That desperation wasn't about money. It was about survival. Looking back, she's admitted she felt disappointed by her father, torn between longing for the version of him who'd once been gentle and hating the man he became. "I was afraid," she told Rolling Stone, "very afraid that something would happen to my mother. I had nightmares about it." Those nightmares never completely faded. They simply morphed into something more complicated when she got older. Because children who grow up bracing for the next explosion often carry that same anxious vigilance into every relationship they build. And for Nicki, that fear would come to feel almost like home. Psychologists have a name for what happens to children who grow up in houses where chaos is routine and love is unpredictable. It's called anxious preoccupied attachment, a pattern where a person craves deep closeness but never quite believes it will last. According to research in the Journal of Family Psychology, kids raised around explosive anger or addiction often learn to watch for danger before it appears. Their nervous systems are trained to expect the worst and to cling to anything that feels like affection, even if it's laced with hurt. For Nicki, that imprint ran deeper than she ever admitted in her early fame. No amount of awards or headlines could erase the feeling that love was something you had to fight for, or something you had to earn by proving you'd stay, no matter how much it cost you. She once said in her Queen documentary, "I vowed from that age no man would ever abuse me, and all of a sudden, that was my life." The moment she spoke those words, it was clear the past she tried so hard to bury had quietly shaped every choice she made, because when chaos is familiar, peace can feel unsettling. Stability feels like a trick. And instead of trusting calm, your heart keeps pulling you back to the only thing it understands, the uneasy thrill of loving someone who can hurt you. By the time Nicki Minaj was building her empire, she had already stepped into a relationship that would last more than a decade. She and Safari Samuels started dating in the early 2000s, long before the pink wigs and platinum plaques. To outsiders, their bond seemed unbreakable. He was her hype man, her right hand, the person standing just outside the spotlight. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling in ways the public wouldn't see until much later. In 2011, a police report claimed Safari struck her with a suitcase during an argument. Years later, after their breakup in 2014, Safari tweeted that Nicki once cut him so badly he nearly died. He said he left their house on a stretcher but lied to police, claiming he'd tried to hurt himself so she wouldn't get arrested. Nicki fired back, accusing him of stealing her credit card and trying to humiliate her in public. For most celebrities, that would have been enough scandal to last a lifetime. But Nicki's love life was only growing more entangled. Not long after her split from Safari, she confirmed rumors that she was dating rapper Meek Mill. In the beginning, their relationship looked like a fairy tale, a power couple at the top of their careers, flaunting luxury vacations and lavish gifts. But the facade cracked faster than anyone expected. When they broke up in 2017, the breakup didn't quietly fade away. Instead, it exploded into a public spectacle that made headlines for months. They traded accusations online, with Nicki posting cryptic messages that hinted at betrayal and Meek clapping back with his own jabs. But it wasn't just petty insults. Nicki alleged that Meek had been violent, claiming he beat his own sister, spit on her, and kicked her in front of his mother. Accusations Meek denied outright. The feud only grew nastier. When Meek liked a meme mocking Nicki's husband, Kenneth Petty, she retaliated by posting a picture of Meek's face covered with a clown emoji. It was the kind of toxic back and forth that mirrored the chaos Nicki had sworn to leave behind. And to anyone paying attention, it was becoming clear that no matter how much she tried to rewrite her story, the same painful patterns kept finding her again. In 2018, after years of moving on from her past relationships, Nicki found herself reconnecting with someone from a much earlier chapter of her life, Kenneth Petty. They'd first met in high school, but their relationship hadn't lasted long before life sent them in different directions. Fast forward to 2018, and Nicki was back in touch with Kenneth, reigniting a spark that had never fully gone out. For Nicki, their connection was different from anything she had experienced before. Kenneth wasn't a celebrity, wasn't vying for attention on social media, and wasn't concerned with fame or fortune. He was someone who knew her before the world did, before the pink wigs, the rap battles, and the controversies. To Nicki, that familiarity must have felt like an anchor in the storm of her high-profile life. They married in 2019 and welcomed a son the following year, and for a moment, it seemed like Nicki had finally found the kind of stability she'd always craved. Her friends even told People magazine that the bond between them was genuine, that it was rooted in a different type of connection, one where Kenneth was focused on her and not on the glitz and glamour of the spotlight. But as much as their relationship seemed to be a love story of redemption, it was hard to ignore the shadow Kenneth brought with him from his past. While Nicki Minaj's relationship with Kenneth Petty seemed to offer her a sense of stability, it was hard to escape the darkness of his past. Kenneth's legal history was far from clean. He was a registered offender, having been convicted of attempting a non-consensual act in the first degree at the age of 15 with a 16-year-old girl. This dark chapter in his life was only one of several legal entanglements. In 2002, Kenneth was involved in a fatal shooting, which resulted in a second-degree murder charge. His sentence was eventually reduced to first-degree manslaughter, and he served 7 years before being released in 2013. As Nicki's relationship with Kenneth grew more public, so did the scrutiny over his past. Her fans weren't the only ones bringing up his criminal history. Media outlets, critics, and internet trolls were relentless, questioning why someone as successful and high-profile as Nicki would marry a man with such a troubled history. Nicki's response to the backlash was swift and defiant. She defended Kenneth, often framing the criticism as an attack on their love rather than an attempt to address his past actions. When fans began to comment on his charges, she shut down the discussion by turning off comments on her Instagram posts and writing, "He was 15, she was 16, in a relationship. But go off, internet. Y'all can't run my life, thank you, boo." In Nicki's eyes, their bond wasn't about what the world thought. It was about their shared history, their connection, and the love that she felt. But that didn't make the situation any less complicated. Kenneth's past legal troubles, combined with his failure to register as a sex offender after moving with Nicki to California, kept haunting their relationship. Even in 2020, when he was arrested for failing to comply with his registration, it felt like his past was never far behind them. But to many observers, Nicki's fierce defense of Kenneth wasn't just about love. It looked like something deeper, something rooted in the wounds she never fully healed. Psychologists have a word for this kind of bond: trauma bonding. It's when someone clings to a relationship, no matter how damaging, because their nervous system has learned to confuse volatility with intimacy. Author Sandra Brown explored this in her book, Women Who Love Psychopaths, describing how early trauma and a high tolerance for chaos can blind people to red flags that others would run from. For Nicki, Kenneth may have symbolized something familiar, something that felt almost safe in its dysfunction. He was a piece of her past, a reminder of who she was before the fame swallowed her life, and to her, that nostalgia was powerful. There's also the phenomenon called shared psychosis, when two people adopt a shared version of reality that helps them deny the truth. That doesn't mean Nicki literally believes Kenneth is innocent, but it does suggest that admitting the full story would feel like tearing down the fragile sense of love she's built. To acknowledge the reality would mean facing the pain she's been trying to outrun since childhood. So instead, she doubles down, insisting their critics just don't understand, that their bond is real and unbreakable. Because to her, letting go wouldn't just be the end of a marriage. It would be the moment she'd have to admit that all along, her heart was chasing something it never really had: peace. When Nicki's father died in a hit-and-run accident in 2021, she called it the most devastating loss of her life. Even though he had spent years trying to change, going to rehab, trying to repair the damage, some scars never fully fade. In the weeks after his death, Nicki shared that she found herself wanting to call him more than ever, as if some part of her was still that little girl desperate to fix what had been broken. And that's the thing about early trauma. It becomes the blueprint for everything that comes after. The chaos Nicki grew up with didn't just vanish when she became famous. It stayed with her, shaping how she saw love, how she trusted, and who she let into her life. To the outside world, it might look like she chose partners at random, but in reality, her heart kept returning to the same story she learned as a child. That devotion means sacrifice, that love feels like uncertainty, and that pain is just part of the deal. There have never been public reports that Kenneth has physically hurt Nicki, and for many, that feels like a relief. But psychologists warn that the absence of violence doesn't automatically mean a relationship is healthy. Sometimes the danger isn't in bruises, it's in the way your mind slowly convinces you that this is the best you can hope for. Until Nicki confronts the memories she's tried to bury, she will likely keep reaching for men who remind her of the past she never escaped. Because no matter how powerful or successful you become, your heart has a way of dragging you back to the same familiar chaos. And when you've spent a lifetime learning that love and fear are intertwined, anything softer will always feel undeserved.